Most men walk into their lawyer's office thinking the hard part is over. The fights are cooling off, the paperwork is almost done, and all that's left is to sign the agreement and move on. But here's what nobody tells you. This is the moment that decides everything. Not the shouting matches, not the court dates. The quiet, final conversation where you either ask the right questions or you don't. Because once that ink dries, it's not just a divorce. It's a binding contract that shapes your money, your kids, your freedom, and your future. And if you didn't push for clarity before signing, you may have just agreed to pay for things you don't control. You may have given up rights you didn't even know were on the table. Not because you were careless, but because you trusted the process to protect you. But family court isn't designed to protect men who stay quiet. It rewards the one who asks, who challenges, who demands specifics. And if you don't ask the hard questions before you sign, the court will assume you're fine with the answers. This video isn't about paranoia, it's about preparation. Because if you don't know what you're agreeing to, you're not walking away clean. You're walking into years of consequences you didn't see coming. The first question most men forget to ask is the one that comes back to haunt them the quickest. What happens if my income changes after the divorce? At the time you're signing, things might seem stable. You've got a job, a routine, and you assume the numbers on the page reflect that. But life doesn't stay still. Jobs get lost, hours get cut, health changes. And if your agreement doesn't include a clause for future modification, none of that matters. That child support or alimony figure, it sticks no matter what happens to your bank account. Courts don't automatically lower payments just because your situation changes. You have to file, prove a significant change, and fight for a reduction. And if your original agreement says the support is non-modifiable, you're out of luck. You could be locked into paying the same amount for years, even if your income drops by half. Men often assume their lawyer will catch this, but that's a dangerous bet. Some lawyers push for a quick settlement and overlook the future. So unless you bring it up and demand clarity, you're signing up for a financial obligation that won't shrink even when your income does. The money you make today won't always match the life you'll be living tomorrow. And if your agreement doesn't flex with that, the pressure won't just build, it'll break you. One of the most painful realizations in divorce comes too late, when you learn that your custody agreement didn't actually protect your time with your kids. That's why the second question you need to ask your lawyer is this: how is custody defined? And can she move away with the kids? Because unless it's spelled out in writing, with real limitations and clear language, she might be able to pack up and move across the country without needing your permission. A lot of fathers are handed a vague, joint custody label and feel a sense of relief. But unless you are specifically listed as a legal decision maker and your parenting time is detailed down to the days and hours, you don't have much to stand on. Even worse, if your agreement doesn't include a relocation clause, she could take the children to another city or another state, and the court might let her. Why? Because judges prioritize the child's stability, and if she presents the move as a fresh start or a job opportunity, you'll be fighting uphill just to stay involved. You think joint custody means equal rights, but without clarity, it often just means limited access. You go from seeing your kids every week to flying out for holidays, if you can afford it. So before you sign anything, demand specific definitions. Ask about relocation terms, because nothing will hit harder than realizing your kids are gone, and there's nothing in writing that says they shouldn't be. There's a line buried in many parenting agreements that sounds harmless until it takes your voice away. In the event of a disagreement, one parent shall have final decision-making authority. It's called a tiebreaker clause, and it's why your third question should always be, what does final say actually mean in this parenting plan? Because if you don't ask, you might be agreeing to a setup where your opinions don't count. Not legally, not practically, not at all. Even in joint custody, one parent is often given the power to make the final call on key issues like education, healthcare, and religion. And when that happens, your role shifts from equal partner to second opinion. You can raise concerns, but if she disagrees, her decision stands. That includes choosing a school you don't support, authorizing medical treatments you're unsure about, or moving your child into therapy without your knowledge. And no, the court won't intervene every time you object, because you already agreed to let her decide. Most men don't even notice this line until it's too late. It's just one sentence, buried in legal language. But it hands over control in the moments that matter most. So if you care about being part of the big decisions in your child's life, don't assume joint means equal. Ask exactly who has final say, and if it's not shared, understand you're signing up to follow, not lead. Debt doesn't disappear when a marriage ends. It just changes shape. And if you don't ask the right questions, it can wrap around your future like a noose. That's why your fourth question needs to be this. Who's responsible for shared debts after the divorce? And what happens if she stops paying? Because unless your agreement spells it out with precision, you could be left paying for things you don't even own anymore. Maybe she agrees to take the car loan or the credit card in the settlement. Maybe she promises to refinance the house or cover joint expenses. But here's the part most men miss. If your name is still on the loan, you're still legally responsible. It doesn't matter what the divorce agreement says. If she stops paying, the creditors come for you. Your credit score tanks. Collections start calling. And your only option is to go back to court, spend more money, and hope a judge sees it your way. Meanwhile, she's moved on. You're the one cleaning up the financial mess. This isn't just about fairness, it's about survival. Because you can't rebuild your life if you're still chained to the wreckage of the old one. So don't assume the debt is gone just because it's no longer in your hands. Ask your lawyer which debts you're still tied to, how they'll be enforced, and what protections are in place if things go sideways. Because if it's not in writing, and if your name's still on the dotted line, it's not over. Not even close. It's easy to assume that if your ex breaks the agreement, the court will step in. That if she violates the custody schedule, withholds your kids, or ignores financial terms, the system will correct it. But here's the harsh truth. Enforcement doesn't happen automatically. That's why the fifth question you must ask your lawyer is, what happens if she doesn't follow the agreement? And what can I actually do about it? Most men are shocked to find out that the court won't chase her down or punish her unless you initiate the process. And even then, it's not quick. You'll need documentation, texts, emails, logs to prove a pattern. You'll need to file motions, go back to court, and pay more legal fees just to get what was already promised to you on paper. And if your agreement isn't specific enough, there's a good chance the judge will shrug and say it's a miscommunication. This is where so many men lose control. Not in the initial deal, but in the months and years after, when their ex slowly starts rewriting the rules. She changes weekends, denies visits, forgets to share info about the kids. And every time you bring it up, she says it's not in the agreement. If you never asked your lawyer how violations would be handled or what recourse you have, you're left reacting instead of responding. So don't just assume fairness will be enforced. Ask exactly how violations will be addressed, what kind of proof you'll need, and how quickly you can act if she starts bending the terms. Because without that roadmap, your rights exist only on paper, and paper doesn't fight back. Alimony sounds like a temporary arrangement, something to help your ex get back on her feet. But for many men, it becomes a financial sentence with no clear end. That's why the sixth question you need to ask is, can I be forced to pay alimony indefinitely? And under what conditions can it end? Because if you don't set limits before signing, you could be funding her lifestyle long after the marriage is over. Some agreements include language that allows for termination if she remarries, moves in with someone else, or reaches a certain level of income. Others don't, and if yours doesn't, she could legally stay dependent on you for years, even if her situation improves. Judges often base alimony on the standard of living during the marriage, not your ability to sustain that lifestyle forever. So if you're the higher earner, you might be locked into payments that feel impossible once life moves on. And here's where it gets worse. Even if you lose your job, retire, or suffer financially, modifying alimony is never guaranteed. You'll need to prove a major change, go through legal channels again, and even then, some courts won't budge. What feels like a clean break turns into a long-term obligation that drains your future plans before they can even start. So before you sign, ask the hard questions. What triggers the end of alimony? What protections do you have if your income drops? Are there time limits, or is it open-ended? Because once it's locked in, that monthly payment doesn't just affect your wallet, it decides how free you really are. After everything you've been through, you might want to talk. Maybe you want to tell your side of the story, explain what really happened, or just clear the air with the people who matter. But what most men don't realize is that their divorce agreement might come with strings attached. That's why the seventh question you need to ask your lawyer is, what can I say and not say after the divorce is finalized? Many settlements include non-disparagement clauses, confidentiality terms, or language that restricts how you can talk about the divorce, even in private settings. It might seem harmless at first. You're not planning to trash her online or air out personal drama. But the problem is, these clauses are often vague, and they can be used against you later. A single comment, a misunderstood post, or even a conversation taken out of context could trigger legal threats. You could be accused of violating the agreement just for defending yourself. Even telling your own family what really happened might land you back in court if she claims you damaged her reputation. And in some cases, these restrictions are written so broadly that they silence you completely, while leaving her free to speak however she wants. If you don't ask about these terms before signing, you could be agreeing to years of silence. Years of watching your name get reshaped by someone else's version of events, with no safe way to respond. So ask clearly, what are the limits on what I can share? What protections do I have if she spreads false information? Because your voice matters, and no agreement should take that away without a fight. There's a dangerous assumption most men make right before they sign. If something goes wrong, I'll fix it later. But that's not always true. And that's why the eighth, and maybe most important, question you need to ask is, what parts of this agreement can never be changed, no matter what happens later? Because once the ink dries, some decisions are locked in permanently, and no amount of regret, explanation, or life change will reverse them. You might assume that if you lose your job, get sick, or face a major shift in your circumstances, the court will be flexible. But unless your agreement includes modification clauses, or unless the law allows it, you're stuck with the deal as written. Things like property division, lump sum buyouts, and certain types of spousal support are often marked as final. That means no appeals, no renegotiation, no second chances. And here's the trap. Those terms are usually written in dense legal language most people skim over. You may not even realize what's non-modifiable until you try to change it and get denied. By then, it's not just frustrating. It's devastating. You could be paying more than you can afford, tied to outcomes you never intended, and powerless to adapt when your life takes a turn. So before you sign anything, look your lawyer in the eye and ask them to walk you through every clause that can't be changed later. Demand clarity, because once those lines are set in stone, no amount of hindsight will undo what you silently agreed to. The most dangerous part of a divorce agreement isn't the conflict, it's the silence. It's the moment when you nod along, assume your lawyer has covered everything, and sign your name without asking the questions that could protect your future. Because once that signature hits the page, it's not just a legal formality. It's a commitment to a version of your life you may not fully understand until it's too late to change. The custody, the money, the decisions, the obligations, they don't adjust themselves. They don't automatically get fairer over time. And if you didn't speak up before signing, the court assumes you were fine with the outcome. But that outcome could mean losing time with your kids, carrying debt you didn't create, or paying into someone else's lifestyle for years. It could mean silence when you want to speak, and legal traps you didn't know you agreed to. So don't let exhaustion or trust take the place of clarity. Don't let politeness become permission. These 8 questions aren't just about details. They're about power, protection, and peace of mind. Ask them. Press for answers. Because the difference between regret and relief often comes down to the things you were brave enough to ask before it was too late to take them back.